I'm going to return us back to those wonderful days in Flatville and try and take you back through several neighborhoods that I have mentioned over the last few months. And those of you getting this on tape, whether it be contemporarily or at some later time, some of the questions I now receive by mail have to do with things that I have mentioned, and someone wants me to go back and explain what it was. And you must understand, in the several years that we have started taping this, I cannot continue to go back. The cities that these are being played, they have access either to the video or the audio that you can go back and hear it all for yourself. Having said that, I'm going to remind you of one or two things, though, to do with Flatville. The first one has to do with the fact that although man refers to this existence as being a three-dimensional world, and without me going back to the hoary level of particle physics to draw a parallel, let me take everyday existence and remind you, or that you can see for yourself, that although physically we can describe this as being a three-dimensional world, without any doubt, there's no argument with that, that what seems to be man's unique ability, his perception, his consciousness, this individuality, is really based upon a two-dimensional attitude with everything that man says he thinks, all the activities of what I've been calling the yellow circuit, and everything that man apparently feels outside the most base physical sensations, what I've been calling the blue circuit, is a two-dimensional world. Likewise, I remind you, I have pointed out that nothing exists unless it operates on the basis of a triad, that there's always going to be three legs to everything that exists. In an undefined, non-understood way, humanity does know that this is a two-dimensional existence going on in a three-dimensional possibility. Man's so-called religions unknowingly have been a reflection of that, that every time ordinary man has been speaking for life, talking about such things as gods, talking about such things as expanded awareness, talking about mystical states, talking about being born again into a new kind of spirit, what they're talking about is, if I may put words in their mouth, and I don't know who's going to stop me, that once I was living in a 2D world, and then I saw the light. It does come out in all of these would-be mystical forms, oftentimes of gibberish, it seems. To wit, they say, I don't know how to describe this, I can't tell you exactly what happened. It was, believe me say, a mystical, astounding experience. But ordinary people, if I may speak for them, which I don't know who will stop me in these closed conditions, it's our camera and our tape, they have a non-functional awareness that I am operating in a lateral universe. I am operating in a 2D world, or I'm operating with 2D perception, wherein this exists within a 3D possibility. But the most that ordinary consciousness makes of it, the most that life needs for ordinary people to have any awareness of this, is in the irrelevant. That would be, if I could not only speak for everyone else, if I had all of humanity here and it would serve some purpose and I could make them hear what I said in a certain way, and I said, look, everything that you say you believe, everything that you believe you feel can easily, with no debate, be divided up into two camps, can it not? And humanity would say, right on. They would have to agree. But then I could say, all right, there is a 3D background to this. Everything that you believe is true is this camp. Everything that is false is over here, right? Right. Everything that you feel to be proper, everything that seems to be humane, decent, profitable feelings, we can put in this camp, and over here are the inhumane passions. that which is less than a human should be, right? And I'll say right. I would say that is what I was pointing out as being the two-dimensional world of perception. But me saying that there is a 3D background of possibilities, listen to this. Everything that you say you believe on any subject, like how we should treat our fellow man, what we should do about rearranging the fortunes of the world to help the less fortunate. Any idea you have, somebody opposes it, right? There's some other group that has a contrary opinion, right? You know, the fools, the idiots of the world, right? And everybody says yes. All right, so we divide up what you say you believe, what you feel, and then the opposing thoughts and our feelings. But note this, you never think about it, but within this scenario, there are going to be many people, some to many people, who apparently would not have any opinion or any feeling about the subject we just mentioned. Am I correct? If I presented it that simply, maybe, people would say, yeah, you're right. If I got too obtuse, if we just said, all right, your opinion is that sports are worthwhile in the so-called spiritual character development of humanity. And the person says, yes, I agree with that. And of course, you would know that he would be wired up to be a certain type of person to believe that. And then I would point out, well, there are people who say, you surely know this, there are people who say that sports are a waste of time, they're only for dunderheads, pea-brains. It has nothing to do with a man's spiritual life, it's for children. Once you get past the point of being a child, who's got any business out running around, hurting themselves and playing soccer and having fun? You never saw pictures of Jesus or Abraham or Moses. You didn't see them out shooting pool, playing leapfrog. And they'd say, yeah, I know there are people like that. They're wrong, but there are people like that. Then I would say, all right, you do know that there are people in the world, if I grabbed them now and said, all right, there's a raging conflict among those who say that spiritual growth is tied directly to exercise. And they say, okay, yeah, I've heard that. And then there are those who say exercise is of no consequence whatsoever to building one's inner life. And they say, yeah, I've heard that. And I say, what do you think? And the guy says, take a walk, give me a break. The whole argument to me is spurious, if not specious, or vice versa. It's meaningless. I mean, that's the kind of crap that I've heard from intellectuals or whoever they picked on. Surely I did not waste those 2 or 3 minutes to make it that plain. So if I went back to the first person I was talking to who was in favor of physical exercise to help one's inner development, and I said, all right, how about that other person I talked to that said, you and your opponents are both just puffery. You're flyweights, you're arguing over that which has no validity, no consequence whatsoever. All right then, if I could grab him, he might, in some theoretical way, as you humans say, he would say, all right, yeah, you're right. I see that there are 3 possibilities instead of 2. But all of you, I've put you through, those of you who have sincerely been following this and attempting all the tasks, these little tricks I've given, all of you have had every opportunity in the world to get your own glimpse of the fact that it comes upon you like a mild-mannered, if not reporter with glasses, a mild-mannered, low-level, perhaps I'm about to have some kind of extraordinary experience state. It's like seeing through the crack. It's like seeing what I used to describe as being the third side to a coin. Any coin that doesn't have 3 sides, you should call the Secret Service. You're dealing with phonies. And you get glimpses that, all right, I've had feelings. I've had experiences wherein this seemed to be an ironclad fact about the way that I reacted, about the way I felt, what I believed. Then I was confronted with an opposing feeling, an opposing view. And I'm just putting words into that which need no words and which you could not describe. And even when I do it, I lie. But it's as though I was suddenly confronted with it, and then something, after all these efforts and all this insanity to which I've been exposed, it came together. And instead of me being back to the perception of a confrontation between me and my thoughts and my feelings and that which opposes me, I suddenly realized there's been 3 of us dancing. There's been a battle going on with 3 people. And I always thought it was me and this other group. And to see that there's 3, it stops that illusionary battle, to give it one useless description. It turns loose shackles that can't even be described until you're freed from it. So, if you were remembering any of my words, which was not the point, but at the time, you would have agreed. I realized there were always three possibilities going on simultaneously, not two, comma. But then, just as important, if not more so, you should have a continuing awareness that even when you have these flashes and something correctly gives you the sensation that this changes everything, not theoretically, not in some would-be spiritual way, but this has changed, not just up in the yellow circuit, not just in the mind, but my whole dance with what was going on, including what seems to be me internally, the partnership. Everything changed right then. Listen, I'm home free now. I'm on the way. And then you don't remember that until 6 months later when I bring it back up. There, without anyone having to agree with me, without me having to preach a sermon like a Southern Baptist and wave a book, should be the further proof of how little there's any room to maneuver. To see that which seems to make sense and then turn right around and it's upside down. I'm glad somebody finally did this correctly. That's a little joke for you people on tape, in case you think that someone took your TV monitor and turned the horizontal hold around to 180 degrees. There, as far as man's perception, forget just the so-called physical description of height, breadth, and depth. When it seems to be that which is unique to man, his so-called perception, his consciousness, his individuality, it is a two-dimensional creature. But it exists within a three-dimensional pool. It exists, and we are conscious of it, on the background of 3D possibilities. If it were not so, you would be locked in to good versus evil, black versus white, up versus down, and nothing could move. Life could not grow. All right. Now let me go back to 2 or 3 neighborhoods over the last few weeks and see if I can drag your attention through the mud and pick up some dust in 2 or 3 places. How about, for the beginning of tonight's sermon, commentary? How about vices, my equation, and life is a contact sport? My equation, few people getting this at other times and other places remember, was I plus not I equals everything. Which some years ago when I first sprang that, and I guess even today with some of you people just first exposed to it, even without my further expositions on its possibilities, it would seem to be either supremely simplistic or supremely simplistic, but obviously a ruse, because there must be more. It seems, at least at the basic level, that that is a non-controversial equation. That everyone wired up at the ordinary level, everyone from the Pope, rabbis, the president, your mother and father, you, as you were in the partnership, has the feeling it's me, and it's everything that's not me. My mother and father, my lover may be a little closer to I, but still there is I, there's the end of my skin organs, there's the end of my feelings, the ends of my thoughts, the ends of my wisdom, the ends of my ingratitudes, and it stops here with me. And then there's everybody else, and you put all that together, and it does not spell mother. It spells everything. That there is no way out. Your forefathers, of course, believed that the idea of guides and outside forces, something outside this system that feeds itself, would be in here. Then the thing is, in some way, I'm trying to merge the two. Back to some of my neighborhoods. Remember, I was mentioning vices some weeks back. I said very little, and I left it with you at the time, but I was pointing out that all of the things that have always been considered vices, You can take it for the last 5,000 or 6,000 years. You can take it from any part of the planet, any part of life's body. Everything from drinking to masturbation. Anything that's ever been called by a vice by a substantial number of people. And all that requires is a substantial number of people if we remember it. Even if it's thousands of years old, if we still remember it, if we've read about it, if somebody remembers it enough to print it in a book, a substantial number of people, that is a good portion of life's body, was forced to say, this is a vice. You should not do this if you're going to be a good blank, a good Jew, Muslim, Christian, etc. I was pointing out to you, somewhat rhetorically, the little part I threw out, but I said, could you see that from a certain viewpoint, all of man's vices, any you can think of, could be seen from a certain view as an attempt to expand the knot to further separate I and not I. Then last week I brought up for you for a period of time the idea of life being a contact sport. So with those three neighborhoods in mind, try this. All of that have been referred to as man's vices could be seen as an attempt to minimize the contact, to minimize the individual's sporting contact with life, to minimize his contact with what seems to be outside the limits of his own skin organs. And it does it either in quantity or in quality. Since I picked out two that everybody enjoys, drinking and jacking off, you could say, or I could say, speaking for you, you could say if someone was just fanatical about masturbating, some man, I guess would blame it on a man, and he'd never get around to taking out women. He would never fulfill that which is necessary to some degree by humans to keep the race going, to keep these germs, to keep life's body populated. Then we could say that if that vice became, as many good fundamentalist people believe, an overriding concern that at any moment, if we let Penthouse and Playboy and Skin magazines get out of hand, we could all be done for. All right, you could say, to make it quite simply, that this would cut down on the quantity of contact between this man with his blistered hand and women, people of the opposite sex. Or to speak in the matter of quality, let's go to booze. And if I must remind any of you newly arrived people seeing these tapes, what I say about booze or drugs or anything is not an attack per se. That is not the point whatsoever. But let me use this for an example. A continuing state of having alcohol in the system cuts down on the quality of the contact between I and not I. It's a simple fact. It should be to you people, because I assume all of you have been under the influence of the great god Bacchus, her mad dog. And no matter what the partnership may tell you, no matter what your own kind of strange imagination may tell you in the past, or would have told you that, a few drinks, and it's surprising how much in the right light that I look like Robert Redford. It's surprising how much more I have to say to women. I can even think of all of the zodiac signs to ask them what their sign is. All you've got to do is have a modicum of perception above what you were before you got involved with this to realize that indeed that seems to be the fact. That's an accepted fact, almost by humanity, that a few drinks can loosen up a right kind of person, can even make you be more personable, etc. But all of you should realize that it cuts down on the quality. It's a simple fact. For someone attempting to do this, it is not a simple fact, it is a glaring fact. With ordinary people, we could make a parenthetical aside, which is no consequence. Some smart aleck observer could say, with some ordinary people, I'm not sure it matters that much whether they've got a few drinks or not. But it does cut down on the quality of the contact. To speak of life as a contact sport, and what I was speaking of last week was primarily having to do with what appears to be the interaction of man, the organism, with other people of the race. But turn it more now to an internal matter. And although I conceded that there was no problem in accepting the ordinary physical descriptions of man as being, and his existence as being three-dimensional, if you take such pictures, we don't have a movie here and I don't have a two-dimensional photograph, but pictures that you've all seen somewhere, back in college or on television, pictures of the bloodstream. All of that can be presented, comprehended by average sophisticated people. That we could show it up on a screen, the blood flowing through the system, and it would be two-dimensional, and yet it is quite adequate for your own perception, for someone, a professor, for me, for somebody to comment on, watch how the blood is moving, see how such and such happens. Perception is based quite adequately on what amounts to a two-dimensional presentation of that which, as I said, is assumed to exist in the three-dimensional world. Lateral thinking is in the same position. This is the automatic, the hardwired operations in everyone of their yellow and blue circuit primarily. I could take it into the red circuit of the body in toto, but it's of no consequence right now. To go into this, I could label the next paragraph of this commentary as being life as a contact sport and lateral thinking. Because it amounts to this: if what seems to be your own consciousness is limited only to two-dimensional awareness, then perception can never get outside of what amounts to lateral thinking. That in the same way that they can now through electron photography, I've seen, all of you have seen it since I was using an example of the blood system, that you can see actually the blood cells, one after another, bumping right along, carrying all the little foods and all the little oxygens to all the little parts of your body. And to narrow it down to one, it is as though electrons were getting in a line, running right along, one at a time. The blood cells are doing the same thing. And what can be seen in one's own self is everything that I have laughingly, heretofore, referred to as consciousness, as my own perception, as my own knowledge, is operating in a molecular manner, just as I told you. But you can see all these little thought molecules, they're all lined up like little cells, and they're going boom, 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 and running, one following another. They follow another as predictably as the blood follows, that the cells follow each other's preceding cell within the blood system. What is not recognized further is under all ordinary conditions, with what I'm referring to tonight as lateral thinking, you are left with absolute dependence upon two-dimensional information. And this brings about that phenomenon that I have mentioned in passing, an absolute reliance upon external sources. Because as long as your so-called consciousness, as long as all of your human perceptions are 2D in nature, that you are left with thought molecules trailing one after the other. You are continually left with a reliance upon external sources. That you can be claiming that you are on a mystical quest. You could be proclaiming that your one desire in life was to become wise, educated, super tolerant. And at the same time, at the ordinary level of existence, look at all of the so-called spiritual heroes. Well, not all of them. 4 or 5 of the ones you've heard of are the ones that supposedly wrote the books I was about to mention. So there are a few exceptions. But everybody else, what do they have to do? If you look upon, to pick on the poor old Pope again, all the way from him to an apparent non-spiritual conclave where they say, here's Professor so-and-so, the world's leading expert on blank, philosophy, biochemistry, astrophysics, particle physics, contemporary sociology. All right, the more the man is carrying credentials, the more everyone assumes that what he has to say is cogent, squared. The more you can expect what? Even in his speech, we're not talking about monographs and writings. In his speech, it will be peppered with a continual reference to, as Dr. So-and-so said, as Professor so-and-so said. Now, this is a part of life. There's nothing wrong, of course. It's not an attack on these people. But you are so accustomed to it, no one listens. You go to a place, where it be supposedly a spiritual teacher of any religion, any cut of a guru, all the way from that to the apparently most mundane of interest. And what are you going to be continually confronted with? A running reference to external sources. And no one is wired up to have this wonderment. Not, of course, to be a routine smart aleck to stand up and point this out to anybody, but off on your own, off on a frolic of your internal own, is to wonder, why is it that I save my money and travel 2,000 miles to meet this guy or go to this conference? Now, I'd heard about him or her, read his books, or kept reading people refer to him, took a shower, cleaned up, got here, sitting here with my pad and pencil, and he continually says, and I quote, as Dr. So-and-so said, as such and such said. Have I wasted my money? Is this the true, if not example, or if not the zenith, at least a routine example of what the world calls experts? No one notices it. Now, I didn't go through all this to make some crude point that people have to rely on somebody else, because that is the nature of ordinary knowledge. In other fields, as I have attempted to catch your attention, arts, for instance, would not exist were it not for critics. You, me, other routine smart alecks can stand around and make up jokes about critics and how silly the whole thing is, and every now and then, for my own reasons, you notice I'll make up a critique that an ordinary critic would do of a work of art, a painting, a piece of music. And of course, when I do it in the context I do it here, most of you normally laugh. Like, you know, that's meaningless. What does that have to do with what apparently was going on? And it's not meaningless. Artists could not exist without critics. Prophets could not exist without Pancho Pilate and the Cisco Kid. Man's gods could not exist without his devils. What seems to be the expansion of ordinary knowledge, of ordinary wisdom, all the way from technology to apparently extensions of man's spirituality, his routine intelligence even, is based upon this continual reference to the past. And that can be contemporaneous. It's still the past for a man to stand here and say, as Professor so-and-so, as my colleague wrote last week. Or he can say, as my colleague just told me. It's always in the past. You cannot make a footnote, you cannot do a supra without the supra being So all references is to something that happened. So it is not simply an attack. It is not to point out some shortcoming in the intelligence of popes and rabbis and gurus and professors. But it is never noted. No one has anything to say. It says almost, if you take what I'm pointing out and listen in a certain non-critical manner, this is not true, of course, what I'm about to say. But you can hear in a certain way that might get you into a crack that you ordinarily would not perceive of. It says almost, you can hear, that they're afraid that if they did not throw all this in, all these other references, and they just came out and talked for 30 minutes and said, here's what I've got to say, based upon my research, based upon my understanding, here's what I've got to say. Fuck everybody else, I'm telling you what I got to say. If you listen a certain way, and remember this is not a critique, but it's something you wouldn't ordinarily do, is why I'm telling you to try this. You listen a certain way, you could feel right then that, yeah, if they did not have something to rely on, a book, the Torah, the Koran, Professor so-and-so, all of the other guys' works for the last 10 years, last 100 years to rely on, to quote, then they'd be left standing here perhaps nude, intellectually, if not some other way. But it's as though almost, as though they have covered themselves, almost like bulletproof fig leaves, not only over their genital areas, but over their little brains and everything else that, wait a minute, I heard you people laugh when I was saying about such and such theory. You better watch it. That wasn't just me talking. That was professors, and they named 3 or 4 people from MIT. The man says, hey, Abraham, Moses, Buddha, if you know how to read it right, they all 3 said that. You know, don't try to sell me cheap. I am in good company. I know from whence I cometh. That's New Age California for I know where I'm coming from. There is that biblical Californian. If your contact internally, or what seems to be human consciousness, is left, if it is based upon lateral thought, that you are left with only that, as I used to draw, of man, the great nervous system, and me saying this is just your run-of-the-mill brain going up to line-level consciousness, and this being lateral consciousness, you being wired up in such a way that anyone correctly attracted to this, through a little effort, can find out it is impossible, for all intents and purposes, it is impossible under any ordinary conditions for me to think of anything I'd never thought of. That is line-level consciousness. It's just impossible. I've given tasks before, and I can give another one. It's impossible for me to think of anything unless I've already thought of it. I can rearrange it. I can put 2 things together if enough pressure and heat's applied to me, or accidentally, I might do it. I might do it with a few drinks, a few tokes. Sometimes it's like 2 things can come together that I never thought about and make me go, wow. Lateral consciousness is that which you have already thought. It is that which is, for all intents and purposes, the limits of what you will ever perceive under ordinary conditions. That is lateral thought. It's doing the best you can up to the level of everybody else. It's the level that life demands here and now. It's the only level that is necessary. And within this, even though I just refer to the brain right now, it is the entire nervous system, taking everything that seems to be your own physical life, all of your so-called passions. If that is what you are left with, if that is the extent of your own perception, I want you to try and understand what I'm saying, that you are left with a 2-dimensional base of consciousness. No matter that you can physically perceive 3 dimensions, sitting here looking at me, turning around looking at those around you, you must, to function at a modicum of efficiency in life itself, but when it comes to this supposedly singular gift of man, the one place that his nervous system has developed that no one else that you can see has reached, you are yet talking about 2-dimensional. You're talking about a world of flatland, and you're talking about life being a contact sport within you, wherein the biochemical reality of what thought is runs one thought molecule after another. And they run along the same paths over and over. And in doing so, this is a part of why ordinary consciousness continually must refer to life itself. This is not an individual problem. Life itself, through man, must refer continually to external, past sources. Wherein, in a moment of weakness, in times past when I used to make some dogmatic statements, I told you, for those truly involved with this, there is no past. Or to be more spiritual, fuck the past. It's absolutely useless to anyone attempting to do this. Useless, no matter what your past was. But your contact, you playing the internal contact sport, which you must, being drafted as you were into this all-universe team, internally, and then it gets reflected externally, but internally, the contact goes from what seems to be I, my own consciousness, to then not I, that there must be external sources. There must be someone who knows more than I do. Preferably, there must be information written down for good people in the yellow area of life's factory now, which includes, I'll assume, all of you people. If it's written down, it's even better. And if it's written down 1,000 years ago, better yet. Because if it's written down, it's not just a joke. To remind you that at line level, you go back and you pick up something. Pick up a translation from some obscure Tibetan monk 600 years ago. It's gone through 2 or 3 translations. And arguably, you could say, perhaps bears no resemblance to the original intent, and yet those attracted to would-be mystical matters can read that and go, my God. I mean, that sets up some kind of internal vibration that speaks to me in some way that Superman comic books don't. It has some real significance, and that is not simply illusion, since there is no such thing as an illusion, other, of course, than the illusion that people think that imagination doesn't exist, that illusions are illusions. But if you're left with lateral perception, you and all of humanity must refer to external sources, to holy books, to quotations, to what someone else said. That is a fact. You should be able to see it. That is a fact that is a part of the energy transfer system of life's body. That is part of the purpose of man's memory. It is to be able to reuse energy that has already been chewed up and used once. And some of it, the energy was based upon, at that time, such important matters that some ideas have lasted 3,000 or 4,000 years, that you can still pull out something that Moses or Confucius said, perhaps. And I'll be damned if it doesn't sound like you can chew on it when perhaps X millions of people before you chewed on it and went, wow. Wow. And it's yet that old, somebody chewed on it and they threw it down, and you can still pick it up and chew on it, and it seems to mean more than at least some of Pythagoras' theorems that you might go back and read from the same era and go, hey, you know, so what? You know, I knew that. I read a play that some Greek playwright wrote. The point is, there is a continual, perforce, reference and dependence upon, and this, they're actually synonymous, external sources in the past, or not I in the past, because not I, to anyone who is truly alive above the ordinary level of consciousness, not I is always the past. I've been through that enough that everyone's supposed to remember that. Now that I remind you, of course, that through the simple laws of physics, I being right now, you're not I, what you're seeing, what you're hearing is already in the past. And if I were ordinary, and in some way there's the kind of thing that goes on in everybody else's head, was going on now, and in some way I was plotting, or this was a speech that I had written and I had it memorized, and I was trying to stay a sentence ahead of myself, let's assume that that was true. That ain't a bad idea. All right. Make a note of that. Then whatever you're hearing right now, speed traveling 1,000 feet a second, light waves traveling even faster than that. You're not seeing me now, you're not hearing me now, nor are you. It is already in the past. Not I is always the past to what seems to be one's I. It is there that this need comes in, this necessity to refer to not I, that is, to external sources for apparent direction, for apparent wisdom. But it is synonymous to say, I got to refer to the past. And I could certainly take that view and argue if we were part of the Soupy Sales School of Chiropractic Medicine, or if it was part of the debating team, we could point out, I could take that side if I was working for ordinary life and point out that we must have such a basis. We got to have that kind of memory. We cannot start off and reinvent the whole damn world. I can't do it. Or even if I could, it would be foolish. Look at all these people that's gone before me. Look at all the wisdom stored in books, even stored. Perhaps a few people are beginning to believe a little bit that there's more stored in there than the size of your sneyes and your ears and your sex. But even if I could start all over, why should I? Why not be Mr. or Mrs. Efficiency and take advantage of all this past wisdom? Of course, then you're left with that dirty question I hate to bring up on a nice evening like tonight. If all that amounted to anything, what in the hell are you doing here? Now, you had 10 or 20 or 30 years to go through that before you ever had the misfortune to end up here. If all of this wisdom, if your forefathers' religion, if all of the great books that you've read, if indeed this basis could carry over, if indeed it could in some way, once you ate it, come true as you want to believe, that we are what we eat. I am now the combined wisdom of the Old, the New Testament, the Quran, all of the baskets and loaves of Buddha. It is all me. I ate it. I bought them. I stole them. I got it memorized. What difference did it make? None. Not to the few people. None. So then you end up someplace like this when there seems to be no basis for anything. It's an unjust world. There's no doubt about it. All right, what I started to say in this 2.5 paragraph, there is actually no such thing as 2D information. There are no linear facts. By linear, I'm referring back to lateral thought, of that which seems to be this great continuing reality of cause and effect, of things being understood and then being built upon, and then the wisdom of one age or one person being passed to another, or even the ability to make quantum leaps of one man being touched by the gods, having revelations given to him. We are still talking about a two-dimensional, a linear series of so-called knowledge. In the ordinary world, that is quite sufficient. Quite sufficient. Now this, I'm just giving a slight twist to 2D reality, but for a particular reason. Although that is quite sufficient in the ordinary world, for someone attempting to do this, the truth is, there is no such thing as 2D, two-dimensional information. Anything that is part of your perception now, anything that anybody thinks they know, whether it be theoretical or from so-called experience, and it is two-dimensional. That is, that your perception, your grasp of it is what I know, what I have learned to be true from my own experience, or what I've learned to be true through some kind of revelation, or through understanding what I have read and thought about it, and then anything that conflicts with this directly is certainly not true and not worth my time. You are dealing with linear information, and it's useless. From the view of someone attempting to do this, from everything from your so-called experience to what may seem to be your own attempts to ponder, to think, to expand your own intellectual or spiritual horizons. If it is 2D information, it's no information at all. You have got to be able to move at a right angle to it. Last week in closing, I don't guess I mumbled it. I just threw out, like I just thought about it, if you recall. I said, why is it that life seems to be so intrigued with right angles? Why aren't there more lesser and greater angles than 90 degrees, such as this? Why has almost all of life seemed to be absolutely in love with right angles? You don't have to take that as being a hidden metaphysical hint, but then again, you can if you want to. You have got to be able to go at a right angle at what seems to be lineal information, that which would normally flow through your own system, that within which one fact, one aspect of a greater fact, that one fact follows another. One impact of an experience I've had follows the thoughts I had about it. Some action that I seem to have taken was followed by thinking about that action, which later was followed by some additional action. I have built upon my experiences. I have built upon that which I have read. I have built and expanded upon that which I have pondered. And you have not. And it can be seen quite simply by a few people that which seems to be lineal information is no information at all. That you don't know anything more than you did once the bloodstream of the yellow circuit really got cranked up. Now, you have certainly picked up some new facts that can hold you in good stead in the 2D world. Perhaps the last couple of months ago, you might have been the first time when you went to New Orleans with us. I've never been there. I didn't know all you got to do from this area is go to Alabama line and hang a right. Plus, I never noticed, but you have to go through Mississippi, and then you take a small left. You get on Highway 95, the interstate. That could be what you would call new information. But notice it is lineal information. It is 2D information. You have got to be able to go at a right angle to everything that is already now a part of your lateral thinking. It is only that will take one beyond the limits of lateral thought. And I keep saying thought tonight, but if anybody wants a certain surcease of these apparent limitations, you can throw in what seems to be your run-of-the-mill feelings. They are all lateral. They are all lineal. Everything seems to have a cause. Everything. We've been through this enough, surely, that I guess I am too aggressive, but my father used to kick my ass. I guess I am a little shy, afraid of the opposite sex, but you don't know what my mother put me through. Everything that one seems to have experienced, that one can now feel something about, that one can now have thoughts about the action, is two-dimensional, / lineal, / lateral, / one feeling or thought biochemical molecule running right after the other one. Just as surely as the blood flows in one direction, as surely as electrons taken down to a small enough line, they find out now, seem to get in line and run one after the other until it gets into Funnyville. All of the historical, so-called historical problems of how are we going to explain the apparent reality of evil if some kind of good force is in charge of this, and all of us who seem to have a mystical itch, I should say all of you, sometimes I try to act one of the boys, but that this itch is based some way upon feelings I have. Some way I've been called by great forces to try and figure out, or to have it revealed to me, how things can be so misconstructed here. How people can be so foolish. How things can go against man's own best interest. And of course, as you should know by now, no one can explain it. No one can explain it to everyone's satisfaction. Those that have this view can explain it to a large portion of the world. But if these people could be plucked out of this illusionary three-dimensional reality and put in, like they should be, two-dimensional dolls and placed up on a bulletin board, you would see that for this leader, you find X hundreds, thousands, millions. And for those that oppose him or her, you have. And you have another little string of Indians. You have another string of what amounts to a place that life is moving energy in its own astounding form, and it goes in one linear direction. Blood does not back up. There are flaps within the blood system. I assume you all remember your undergraduate biology. Tell me somebody didn't sleep through it. You have these little flaps so that blood only goes down in this one direction and can't back up. It has to run its course and then come back through, be oxygenated and sent back down. That is the same thing that happens with what seems to be one's perception, with what seems to be one's feelings. People cry out that I want to be changed. People have cried out for ages. I need some supernatural force to put me on the right track so that I will not continue to hate this group of people, or to hate myself, or to hate my parents. Somebody has got to stop this process and back me up, and you cannot do it. There are flaps there. One of the flaps is, believe it or not, is man's perception of time. It's been a long time since I drew my old cross, but who all remembers the good old my cross? What seems to be the eternal present, and over here what seems to be everyone's undeniable past, and then what seems to be the incontrovertible reality of the future up here, and then right here, as I used to describe it, is what seems to be one's own consciousness here in this great slippery highway drama, except for those what get run over by semis. But can you also see that by drawing that, and by it seeming to make sense if you followed that, it all runs in a very predictable, a very sane, a very confined, lateral course. The so-called problem of how can I stop my feelings, or what force, what great truth, what great idea, what great religious teacher could I find, what external forces from this system might I find that's going to, this is what they're asking for, all of them, all religions. Who can take me from here and back me up? But the great world of lateral thinking, you can apparently be talking about, listen, here I stand in a position of discomfort. Here I stand away from the great cosmic forces. Here I stand in a position of being less than a true, humane, wise person. But my plan is, the reason I've saved my money, the reason I'm going to go to Tibet, the reason I'm going to buy new mystical books, the reason I'm going to contribute money to Jimmy Swaggart, is so that tomorrow I'll be a better person. That's what it sounds like they're talking about. Even all the religions with some notion that after this veil of sin and sorrow, I'll be rewarded. This shit will be off my back. And it sounds as though they're talking about the future. But what they're really talking about is, I wish there were no flaps in this flow, in this linear flow, to where I could go back. Because if I could go back, I would not be this disreputable person. I would not be this thing that I perceive of as myself, which makes me discomforted. Because it has been my past behavior. You know, whether you attribute it to some kind of original sin where your forefathers pissed the gods off, or just your notion, if you claim to be an atheist, that ever since I can remember, I've been a real pisser. I've hated people. I used to steal. I used to shoplift. I ran around on my first two wives or husbands. But now, I've reached the age, I feel like now I truly understand something about the ultimate purpose of man, and that God's will it if I could back up and have this redone. And so apparently they're talking about, I want to have some sort of new life. I want to be a new person, a new sense of understanding of consciousness. What they're really saying is, if there were no flaps here and the forces would will it, I'd go backwards. At any rate, please note in yourself, not just my little drawings, the only possibilities at the ordinary level seem to be of a lateral nature. It's slipping and sliding, not with little Richard, it's slipping and sliding in the world of two dimensions. And everyone has had, whether you know it or not, you have had many thousands of years to run that course. It's in your own nervous system, it's in your own spine. No matter which way you turn in the 2D world, the information is no information at all, because it never goes anywhere else. It never changes behavior. It never changes your own understanding. They always worry about these so-called spiritual prophets, where they come from, and these stories that come out about, well, the God sent me. I keep giving hints. I'll tell you where they come from. They come from a right angle to right now, whenever right now was. Let me say something else in this same neighborhood. It's more like the non-definable city limits of the same area. You have got to strive and then learn how to see life not in some simple, two-dimensional, anthropomorphic manner, but you've got to see it rather as a multidimensional, a complex form of life that is capable of containing and nurturing every apparent 2D conflict and opposite. That would be a working, at least verbal, and if you can carry it up here, but at least a verbal paradigm for life. Not as a lateral trail of tears, not as a two-dimensional anthropomorphic theory that, hey, all you're talking about is, hey, we're living in the body of God. That still wouldn't tell anybody anything. People played with that idea. That's even older than I am. That's real old. That was a joke if nobody got it. It's older than we are. Very old idea. As old as the idea in the Western world of little bitty atoms, or there being some basic nomenclature of all reality. But it's got to be contained somewhere, and somebody came up with a notion. I say somebody. I've always appreciated, I for one, life's sense of humor, that at least that we know of 4,000 years ago, some molecular part of life's higher nervous system went, ha ha, what if I made the rest of them think that they were, actually told them, that, hey, you brain cells, you liver cells, listen up, a couple of you down there, all these problems you got, all these theoretical, philosophical questions, these kind of spiritual speculations you have, it would all be answered if you understood this. What if, said life's higher nervous system to other areas, what if you were actually just a part of another being just like yourself, but a whole lot bigger, a whole lot wider? There were some people really got caught up in that. And although I don't give a running caveat to this, without any doubt it would be expected that many people that might pick up some of the few things I've written publicly or see one of these tapes once or twice somewhere away from this would get the notion that all I'm describing is some kind of anthropomorphism revisited. That's not true. Because the idea of classical anthropomorphism is, like everything else, a two-dimensional concept. And that tells you nothing. You might as well go back to your forefathers' religion and believe that there is a big, hairy, hoary God somewhere outside this system that went, spat, and created it outside him, her, or itself. You'd be in the same position. You'd be in the same lateral flow that's useless. all the information going through the lateral lane, you might as well be in a carpool, which you are, because you'll never see anything on your own. You have got to be able to see. That's why I keep talking, for one reason, about from different angles about what sometimes sounds to be the same area, that this is not some simple, two-dimensional, linear idea or notion that I conjured up that we're living inside this huge body of this real intelligent guy. That doesn't tell you anything. I mean, if you like that, so be it. You know, get the hell out of here. Go start a church. Go start a fire. Go start a car. It doesn't help. It may be intriguing. I guess according to your IQ and your limit of your experience, that might be intriguing. But back to a little more serious matter. You must see that that explains nothing. All you're left is with another description of, quote, God with a capital G. Something outside the system. Because if we were inside God's body, that's the same thing as you being outside the system. That's the same thing that my relationship with higher forces is still this. It's I plus not I. The gods, higher forces, superior intelligence, extraordinary understanding is something foreign to me. It's outside of me. It's something I've got to gain. That would be God. It's me, and then God, we equal everything. Right-o, that's true. But that is still a lateral concept, and that is the same thing turned over. It's the same coin turned over to say, wait a minute, I live inside this big old guy, and he's God. That's it. And to get to heaven is to try and be so good that you work your way up to his brain. Right now, I'm probably down in his spleen. To be charitable, yeah. Maybe outside of me, it's something I've got to gain. That would be God. It's me, and then God, we equal everything. Right-o, that's true. But that is still a lateral concept, and that is the same thing turned over. It's the same coin turned over to say, wait a minute, I live inside this big old guy, and he's God. That's it. And to get to heaven is to try and be so good that you work your way up to his brain. Right now, I'm probably down in his spleen. To be charitable, yeah. Maybe the lower intestines. But hey, if I contribute my fair share of money, and if I'm a good boy, and if I give up Playboy and drinking, more or less, maybe when I die, I'll go to his brain, and that'll be heaven. I like it. Write it down. We'll start our own church. Take all religions, take all Holy Scripture, and I can make it fit. I can make it fit as fast as I could remember if I knew much about them. I could talk about them. It all fits by God. It all fits. That's what heaven is. Hell is. Hell would be, anti-paradise would be, hey, right now, let's say I'm in the stomach. Let's say that's where all of humanity is. That we're something that God ate, and we're there. And death is when the digestive juices, when you're finally eaten up and you're broken down into the necessary molecular structures, and you're going to hit the bloodstream. Are you going to be into the direct bloodstream, going from the stomach through the other necessary parts of the livers and everything, and get up to the brain? That I'll be dead, but then zap, I'll get there and I'll get in the brain, and that'll be paradise. Or am I going to be part of the waste product? As soon as I broke them up, I'm going right into the intestines. Now, I don't know how much you know about the organs of the intestines, but even the good fundamentalists, their ideas I used to hear about pools of fire and brimstone and being tortured for all of eternity. I could imagine being in some huge guy's intestines. Maybe that's it. At any rate. Well, not at any rate, at a particular rate. It is not of any consequence to take this as being some sort of revisited idea of an anthropomorphic existence. But I have told you as close as I've ever told you to a secret, not going into me or where all this came from. But I'm telling you, literally, that in this day and time, if what I'm talking about is what you're interested in, then I know more about this than anybody. If this way is what you're interested in, and I have told you a necessary temporary truth, which is the same thing as a temporary you know what, to perceive, and it can be perceived, not in theory, not in following what I say, that we are a part of an organic, living form. It is not a big old guy's body. And even if it was, I wouldn't tell you, if I knew. And if we were, I'd know, so. You are not surrounded by dead space. You're not even surrounded by this not I. There is no out there. For those of you who hadn't been around for too long, I don't come up with many more rules anymore, but that was one of my ephemeral, well, it's still true. That'll hold on as long as I do. Of T-Not, the acronym for there is no out there. That this is spurious, the sensation. Apparently the undeniable sensation that there is a difference between me and you. There's a difference between me and my good ideas and my humane feelings, my proper feelings, and somebody over here, some group over here, who are obviously anti-human, anti-decent. So they're even against the truth. They're against all forms of progress. There is a difference between me and Attila, Joseph Stalin, my first wife, my brother-in-law. All forms of ignorance and insanity. Do not clump me in with those. I don't have to. This is a beautiful delusion, but there is no out there. To have the sensation that everyone experiences, from the head pope, the Jewish pope, the agnostic pope, there is a sensation that truly there exists such an equation, and there truly exists this plus sign. There truly exists out there truly exists space between me and everyone else, not just theoretically, but then on the other hand, not just physically. I'm not saying, says the ordinary consciousness, I'm not just saying that there is a difference between me and this other human body. It's much more complex than that. There is a difference between what I know to be true, what I have experienced that was worthwhile, the feelings that guide me to greater heights of potential wisdom. There's a difference between this, which is me and my experience and my knowledge and my feelings, and yours. Especially if yours are in direct conflict with mine. Especially if yours, by common consent of this time and place, are inhumane, are foolish, are destructive. All of this, unbeknownst to ordinary lateral consciousness, and it's never discussed, gives rise to the feeling, the sensation, once I describe it, that there is inorganic reality, even if it just be space, between you and I, between me and Pluto, between me and Saturn, between me and the dead people, between me and tomorrow's generation, between me and Albanians on the other side of the world in a different time zone. But the distance, the plus sign in my equation of I plus not I, that plus sign is inorganic, says ordinary consciousness. Were it not inorganic, there could be no reality to linear reality. Nothing would follow anything else. It has to be inorganic. And right now, life is beginning to just mumble at the ordinary level of consciousness otherwise, just mumble, as many of you know. But up until recent times, as far-reaching as astrophysics has become through technology, through our own space explorations, it seems to be that we're surrounded by out there. We're surrounded by not I. We are surrounded universally by inorganic existence. And it is not true. If that were true, I wouldn't be saying what I'm saying. If that were true, none of you now, at any other time through history, would be wired up to want to understand this. Life would be dying, and it's not. What I have been describing, bits and pieces and from 400 or 500 different directions, and all of these numerous tasks, have tried to drag the few people towards, is that quite personal and real and then continuing feeling, a living personal feeling that I am not surrounded by out there because there is no out there. I am not separated from anything by inorganic reality because there is no inorganic reality. I am in the midst of a complex, I am in the midst of a higher dimensional, don't worry about that too metaphysically, just more than 2D. I am in the midst of a higher dimensional, complex form of life that is capable, all you got to do is see it, that is capable of containing and nurturing every apparent 2D opposite that consciousness may conjure. There, which I'm not going to take it any further verbally because it will absolutely begin to eat itself up, so what else is new? There is one edge to run up to, or to which to run up, wherein these ideas of the great eternal questions of how can there be apparently decent, useful people on this planet, how can there be apparently progressive, nutritional ideas, and then there be that which seems to be destructive. How can all this exist? In other words, they're asking again, to paraphrase myself from earlier, from supra, how can we explain this lateral existence, this 2D world? And there is none. 2D theories cannot explain a 2D world. Worm philosophies will never explain the world universe to our slimy brothers in the ground. No amount of robin talk will ever explain the wonderful world of birds to birds. You've got to be able to get outside of it. You have got to be able to get above the waters to give any kind of reasonable description to fish concerning their existence, concerning their belief that I plus not I equals everything, that the fish believe I'm separate from the water. You've got to get outside the water to do it. You've got to be something other than a bird to ever, if it was necessary, to come up with any kind of useful robin philosophy. Or any kind of Thatcher theories. Or any kind of mockingbird models. Any kind of pigeon paradigms. And so on into illiterate infinity. There is, of course, no way that I know of, and if I did, I would not pursue it, to slap you silly like a faith healer or to give you a magic word so that suddenly you had the continuing awareness that there is no out there, there is no part of life that is inorganic once you get past a 2D level, 2D perception, and that I am in the midst, I am a part of, I was drafted into, I was wired up to serve There is no possibility of me saying otherwise. There's very little room for me to talk about maneuvering right now. I was born into the midst of a higher dimensional, complex, living form. As far as the eye of perception, as far as the eye of consciousness can see, I am, with everyone else, in the midst of a higher dimensional, complex, living form, within which is the power, the necessity to contain and to nurture, to feed every apparent two-dimensional conflict and opposite. There is everything. There is another equation from whence there would be no verbal extraction of everything. While I'm talking about some of this, let me point out, it's been a while since I talked about the two possible, describable reactions that man, the ordinary organism, can have, and that is he either acts or he thinks about acting. Within that particular area of Flatville, let me point out that the absolute so-called physical, or as I must call it for the time being, to differentiate it, biochemical reality of perception, the kinds of things that I have described fairly recently, of all of that will fit into any form of your so-called perception, be it a finger on a hot stove or the belief that you heard the voice of the gods talking to you. It is all absolutely inescapably dependent upon a biochemical, a molecular reaction to that which affected your nervous system. All right. Keeping that in mind, got it. Got it. Keeping that in mind, there must be, speaking for you involved with this, there must be a biochemical change in ordinary perception before any sort of alteration of behavior can occur. Now, this happens on a large scale out in life, but it is not perceived and is of no individual consequence. But examples abound, but let me point out one in most of you people's lifetime. I assume you know that it was an accepted fact based upon thousands of years of experience, literally thousands of years of experience and records of it, at least periodic records that presented, pieced together a full picture, that it was obviously impossible for the human physique to run a measured mile in less than 4 minutes. I cannot quote the year, but I think it was in the 60s, as some of you know, a certain British runner ran a mile in less than 4 minutes. It was an accepted fact that that was simply a barrier. At that time, whether they did it to this extent, it could have been compared, since we had thousands of years of knowing. Even before they had time-keeping mechanisms as we do, there were ways that they had, by what I've been told or read, compared, even back in some of the Grecian days of the Olympics, that they compared men running to the passage of time even before they had Rolexes, and that there was a barrier somewhere that men never got any faster. And then we got into at least this century, and it became of interest. Sports medicine came up, just all of science, as you know, began to explode in this century. And it seemed to be a barrier that they could have said, hey, no human is ever going to stand there flat-footed and jump 270 feet in the air. All right? There's something somewhere else that no matter what men do, they have trained. Here it is, the 1960s. Our lifespan in this part of the world, or in Western Europe, has doubled in the last 4 decades. We're taller. We're less prone to ordinary runs of illness. But no matter what we do, and there are people now training almost full-time, and by God, they'll get up to 4 minutes and 10 seconds, then 4 minutes and 9.99 seconds. But nobody can get past that 4-minute barrier. It was just an accepted fact. One guy did it, and then what happened? You surely know the punchline. People's grandmother began to run, miles in less than 4 minutes. All right, let me point out to you. There was no, like anything else, this is not literally true because no verbal statement, which is lateral. One letter must follow another, one word must follow another. The circular definitions of the dictionary. But, for all intents and purposes, on some day, wherever it was on this planet, Roger Bannister did not suddenly undergo a red circuit metamorphosis. The gods did not suddenly reach down right before this race and touch this poor thin man's, with his little sneakers on, and say, "Bless you, my child, go." Nor, let us say, that right after that, that there was some mid-generation change in the DNA and the genetic structure of people already alive, that suddenly a whole bunch of people underwent this change and could suddenly take off their shirt, put on their shoes, and go wham. You're not talking about a red circuit change. You're not talking about a behavioral change. You're talking about that man's perception, the circuits of perception, changed wherein they were allowed to believe that this is possible, then behavior could catch up. That, on a wide scale, is one description, albeit still lateral, but it's correct. That is another description of the way things progress in the great, wonderful world of Fletville and horizontal existence. But moreover, for those attempting to do this, you've got to be able to recognize this, and then you can learn to move at a right angle. I say you can, I'll put it this way, you got to. Yeah. There's your choice. But you've got to see that under all ordinary conditions, there has got to be a biochemical change in your perception as to what's possible before there's any question of changing your behavior. That would be true if you're trying to stop smoking, if you're trying to cut down on eating sugars, chocolate, if you're trying to make yourself get up and run an extra mile every day, if you're trying to lose weight, if you're trying to put on weight, if you're trying to make yourself study and go back to school. Sad to say, if you're trying to do something extraordinary like this, why else are you here or somewhere listening to me talk? Trying to follow these strange things that I can concoct that you try to do. Nothing, all the way from what seems to be the routine, two-dimensional world, as I said, of trying to lose weight, put on weight, that runs along a linear line, that, all right, I keep putting on this, I know what it is all my life. My mother used to stuff herself, and she used to keep making me these Bavarian pancakes, and nowadays I stuff myself. It's her fault. But at any rate, the point is there's a reason for this, right? Or in fact, I was reading Reader's Digest the other day, and it was talking about certain types of people, and I seem to be type ZX. I'm prone to be depressed. If I was a woman, and it was 30 years ago, I might even have the vapors. And it points out there's much statistical evidence to show that people of my type are inclined to overeat to compensate for not being loved enough when? Back then as a child. Somewhere in my past, it could have been 5 minutes ago when my girlfriend walked out and left me. Where's the damn Twinkies? That undeniably there is a linear There is a linear aspect to life that we can see that things cause me to be like this. Of course, parenthetically, I must point out again, or I will, ordinary consciousness being tied into this kind of lateral mode to move along one molecule at a time, even in its own perception, it never questions, wait a minute, even if this be true, if I aspire to be intelligent and even wise, why did my mother act like that? What made her act like that? What made my girlfriend walk out 5 minutes ago and me say, boy, am I surprised? Give me a break, I don't have time for that. Where's the chocolate? Where's my handkerchief to cry? In this world of lateral thinking, of lateral perception, and I'm using that as just being the ordinary mechanical level of consciousness and existence at which everyone is drafted, which everyone plays their position in this contact sport, even there, this is the way it seems now. Remember, this is not literally true, but this is the most efficient way for me to describe it in two-dimensional pictures right now. Even there must be, apparently, a change in the biochemical mechanism of perception, or of consciousness, if you will, before someone's behavior will change. The man comes home and announces to his wife, throw out the booze, clean out the cabinet, I'm through with it. That's wonderful, honey. And he's been getting drunk and beating her up and ignoring the children for 20 years. What happened? Damn. All right, you know I hadn't been feeling good. I went to the doctor and he told me my liver, is getting about to be the size of Akron and I'm going to die. All right, something happened. His perception, an external source, an apparent not I, apparently with credentials, not a holy book, but nowadays awfully close, a man with a medical degree says, son, after many questions, the guy admits, yes, I drink about 3/5 a day. The doctor says, by the way, you're very close to dying, and I can state this with a fair degree of certainty, you're going to really die as soon as possible if you keep drinking like that. Stop it. Stop it, and you'll probably live a little longer. All right. This has changed biochemically. Now, I've discussed this enough. Forget any idea that a man suddenly comes to his senses, as they say, or a man suddenly is touched by the gods, and the gods say, hey, that's enough of that. I don't like drinkers. Leave that for the Baptists. Since there's a Baptist convention going on, you all remember the definition of a Baptist, don't you? A Southern Baptist. A Southern Baptist told me this one time. That being a Southern Baptist does not keep you from drinking and gambling and running around with women. It just stops you from enjoying it. Back to serious matters. There was a biochemical change in my invented fellow here that the doctor, besides his own perception, I hadn't been feeling good and I seemed to have this large internal growth hanging out here. The doctor looks at him, does x-rays, feels, and the doctor says with a tongue, it sends out sound waves, it says, you're going to die very quickly if you continue to drink. Any chance of recovery, you must stop drinking immediately. And the sound waves traveling at that nice rate of speed of 1,000 feet a second, I believe it is, even though it's old information, and the guy's listening, within a second, it vibrates in here, runs into the portions of the brain in charge of deciphering speech. Forget any idea of miraculous technology, the great benefits of this man having spent 15 years studying to be a doctor, to be able to tell him this, forget the God suddenly saying, that's enough. Biochemically, the molecules change in your brain, and you understand it can take sounds, and it can turn it into what amounts to, as I've asked you through certain tasks to figure out for yourself, pictures and words that seems to be in your own partnership up here in the brain, that it understands, it translates these sound waves. The molecules rearrange themselves, the pictures. He can already hear himself going home and telling his wife, throw out the booze, tear down the bar. He understands what's being said. Alcohol will never pass these lips again. I'm through with it. The perception biochemically was changed before any question of an alteration of behavior has any validity. And that's at the mechanical level. That's at the ordinary, everyday level. That's every conversion. That's every so-called change of mind. That's every time any ordinary person comes to their senses, takes on a new trek in life. But even in this, and this is useful, or I wouldn't be bringing it up. It's not just to hear me talk. You are still left with the reality that there must be a biochemical change in my perception of anything and everything before there is any possibility of altering the way I behave. In other words, there must be a change in the way I think about action before there is a change in my action. Then note, for a long time, for many of you, you don't see a way out, assuming there is something beyond what I'm describing. But there still seems to be this dependence on not I. That is, you keep looking to some other source for some sort of direction to even point out the things that eventually, in some cases, become obvious. But it's just a reality that you would have never seen it had I not tricked you in some way or browbeaten you or screamed and joked, that you would never seen that this is the way things are in this certain respect. And I say it's useful. And I'm suggesting to you most strongly that you be able to contain all this within yourself and ask yourself the musical question. How might I use this if I had no recourse to external stimuli? If you drop dead, that is me tomorrow, is there any way that I could use this, at least two-dimensional fact, that for action, for my behavior to change, which everybody believes your behavior should change in some way, that would be a great boon to your spiritual, if not intellectual progress. Oh, excuse me. That everyone believes this. But how could I use this reality if I were left only to my own devices? This two-dimensional fact that for my behavior to change, I have first got to be able to create a biochemical alteration in my perception of my behavior. If I could make an ordinary person see this and then simultaneously make them hear what I'm asking, which is an acme, that is, apparently this could be done, but it can't, they would say it can't be done. But then I ask you, since this appears to be a closed system in which we live, then in a weak moment you look at you and you appear to be a closed system. Where does such a system get its nourishment? Part of where the nourishment comes from? All right, 2 seconds. Now I'll answer it in part. Part of the nourishment always comes from what? It comes from the friction of lateral perception. It is friction energy will always keep what appears to be a closed system alive. That if I were exaggerating or misleading you in some way in the way that many people perceive this equation to begin with, there is undeniably a me and then everything is not me. And I'm trying in some way to work it out, to bring it closer together, to take it further apart when necessary, when apropos. They would still feel as though, wait a minute, this is almost a closed system, and that's almost a closed system. And I got to deal with this in some way to either, as I said, bring them closer together, or, as they say in Flatville, what's the other possibility? Take them further apart. How could that possibly be used? I'll give you one hint. It's what I keep calling neuralizing. Can anybody understand that that is, in a sense, an attempt to go at a right angle to lateral thinking? That is a direct right angle attack, if you want it that way, on linear reality. It is a right angle attack upon what may appear to be the quite conservative reality that symbolizes, that yes, there is a past, there is some kind of present right now with which I must deal, notwithstanding the fact that I got baggage I'm still carrying from back there, and I've got to some way press on into tomorrow. Whereas the reality of it is, someone standing there, my vertical line representing ordinary consciousness, nobody perceives of three sets of time, not of the past, not of the future, not of now. You should know that. That's part of the intrigue of these periodic groups that pop up. The eternal now groups, all kinds of variations throughout history that are a problem. And life is talking about something quite real. That life will bring up somebody and then some group of people, they come and go, of saying, hey, everybody's either living in the past or worrying about the future. But the way to get in touch with the cosmic forces, the way to get in the good graces of the gods, the way to get in touch with the God's own consciousness is you've got to live in the eternal now. And it strikes a chord in many people. It is a non-threatening, since it comes and goes, and it never gets that as popular as the Catholic Church or the National Football League. It's almost, if you want me to say it in words, it's almost a little temporary, little time warp that life almost lets the reality of three possibilities show up at once. But if I must take it any further, even if right now, if suddenly somebody jumped up and wrote a book based upon the eternal now, pointing out through various ways, through quoting historical sources, through quoting psychological and sociological statistics, that everybody either at any given time is either daydreaming about the past or they're daydreaming about the future. But what we should do is be able to turn our consciousness, hold our attention to right now. We could do all of our jobs better, we'd have better interpersonal relations, and in some way that would put us in touch with the gods, because surely the gods, I mean, if there's some God somewhere that created all this, he doesn't go around worrying about, did I do the right thing? You know, where did I place that other universe? For him, if he's truly a God, he doesn't sit around biting his nails wondering what tomorrow's going to bring. I mean, if he does, he's a damn Kmart God. So that can't be true. So let us say, the little sidetrack I was taking right quick, let us say that right now a book sold, a guy shows up, and he's the spiritual teacher of the we've all got to live right now theory or religion. And I said that it was almost as though periodically God, in our case, periodically life lets the information out that, hey, there are three possibilities going on. If what I described happened in ordinary life, notice how it come out, though. That, all right, you had this guy, the new teacher of we all get to live in the right now religion. He says, the whole world's wrong. The whole world's divided into those at any given time. And it can change, but at any given time, all of humanity is worrying about what happened yesterday, and those that aren't, they're worrying about what's going to happen tomorrow. And that's not it. You got to do right now. All right, you would seem as though, wait a minute, now we got three possible religious or three approaches. They know you. Because 1 second later, as soon as people heard him say this, if it had any validity, if it's going to catch on, some of you are already smiling. You know what happened. Those three camps would immediately, that triad would immediately be perceived as back to two-dimensional, because you'd already have the people who agree with him and those who don't. 3 turns into 2 all the time. 3 turns into 2 before your very eyes. If you could see that 3 does not turn into 2, what if you could just see that there are 3, without going any further right now about what they turn into? That everything I see, I either see it correctly or I don't. Everything that I do is either proper or is not. Everything I daydream about doing, I should probably not do it, or maybe someday I will do it. Everything I have done, everything I remember that I have ever done, was either a bad move on my part, or I can't really remember it. But at any rate, there's only 2 possibilities. If there are only 2 possibilities, I was going to be magnanimous and be one of the boys and say, if there are only 2 possibilities, we're all done for. But sometimes I play too much the down-home nice guy, and I shouldn't say that. It's a lie. If there's only 2 possibilities, you're all done for. Aloha. You rolling? All right. You people getting this by tape who qualify according to my letter, that is, that you have been attending enough of these, someone in your city knows what the requirements are. so I don't have to keep doing this every time I give one. I have a task I want you to do between the seeing of this tape and next week. I want you to go out on our proverbial walk, walking at a nice clip away from not eye as much as possible. That is, noisy not eye. I want you to walk for 40 minutes twice in the next week, and I want you to attempt to do this in this task. I don't want you in any way, as far as you can help it, to interfere with what seems to be the mechanical runnings of the yellow circuit, daydreams. Don't confuse this, don't mix it with any of the tasks of the last few weeks. I want you to walk for 40 minutes, but I want you to do this simple one thing. I want you to attempt, and nothing else but this, to take out the vocalizations of the daydreams. Nothing else. Just let it flow, but take out what apparently is you talking in the daydream. That's all. Nothing else.